Chicago's Morning Answer continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. The peace process in the Middle East. This is what a lot of those who are terrorist enablers or worse are using as part of their cover story for the atrocities that were committed by Hamas against the Israeli people over the weekend. For example, Abbas, Mahmoud Abbas, Palestinian Authority president, saying that Saturday's surprise attack was the Palestinians asserting their right to self-defense. Yeah. Hussam Zomlot is the head of the Palestinian diplomatic mission to the UK. He sat down with Christiane Amanpour on CNN. Painful. But it's not what she said or the poor quality of her interviewing skills. It's what he had to say in terms of understanding the storytelling that they do, one, to separate themselves from Hamas. And I understand there are a lot of peaceful Palestinian people. They want no part of Hamas. I get it. But there are all these essentially political officials who wink and nod with one another on the terrorist activities of Hamas and others. We've seen this before, particularly as it pertains to Israel. So here's what Mr. Zomlot had to say about how we got to that day, Saturday. Doesn't condone it, but he tries very hard to contextualize it in a way that sounds sort of like condoning it.
Bring in Hussam Zomlot now. He's head of the Palestinian mission to the UK. Welcome to the program. First and foremost, do you condemn what Hamas did inside Israel to Israeli civilians? There are dead and there are hostages.
First and foremost, the Western media must really abandon this framework that has gotten us to where we are today.
Okay, but I just want to know, do you support the killing of civilians?
Of course not. Of course not.
So do you condemn that?
The loss of civilian life is tragic in all sides. And what is happening is extremely worrying and very tragic. And as we speak, the loss of lives, you've counted 70 Israeli deaths. There is more than 200 Palestinian deaths so far, more than 1,600. Entire residential compounds are being wiped out. This is a war crime committed by Israel. What is more tragic, or equally tragic, is the blindness and the deafness of the world and the international community for so many years, of the warnings we have been saying that this was coming. Israel knew that this was coming their way. We, the National Movement of Palestine, the PLO, have found a different path 30 years ago. We have committed to what the world asks us: recognize Israel, commit to negotiations and non-violence, and to international legitimacy and resolution. Israel was expected to do one thing only: roll back its occupation, stop its colonial settlement expansion. Not one day it did so, killing the prospects of a two-state solution.
Making morally equivalent the terrorist attacks to the response to the terrorist attacks, you see. Also, just in case there's any doubt that that's what he's doing, listen to this statement.
There's a war. You see, we're having this conversation because Israelis have seen what they have seen today, but my people see this every day, every single day. Palestinians are targeted, killed, arrested, surrounded, their land is confiscated, their holy places are desecrated. Not only Muslims, but Christians. You have been following what is happening in the Al-Aqsa Mosque and in our Christian churches, the spitting on Christian worshippers. Our people have been seeing apartheid being enforced on them over the last years, and the land is being taken, and the hope for a political solution that will fulfill their rights dissipating. And therefore, this is what we need to discuss.
Really, it's happening to the Palestinians every day, and people
Can
are
we see video of it? I mean, they put up war crimes all over social media.
people are ignoring the beheading of children at the hands of Israelis. Really? Eugene Konorovich is a law professor at George Mason University. False doctrines of international law have given the terror group, Hamas, an insurance policy. No matter what atrocities they commit against Israel, they will come out of any conflict with no less territory than before. They may lose men, but they gain gruesome honor. Hamas's war aim isn't to minimize its own casualties, but to drive out the Jews. To defeat and discredit its leadership, the Palestinians must pay a permanent territorial price, he argues. Israel is fighting the clearest possible war of self-defense. Its 1967 capture of the Golan Heights buffer zone was legitimate and humiliated the regime of Hafez al-Assad. Israel has every right to annex buffer zones in Gaza permanently after abdicating more than a decade ago. For more on this, pleased to be joined by Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, co-founder of the Muslim Reform Movement, former U.S. Navy lieutenant commander, and he's a medical doctor, which is why we're calling Dr. Jasser. He's also the author of A Battle for the Soul of Islam. Dr. Jasser, it's been a minute. Good to talk to you again.
It's great, and unfortunate in this horrific situation, but thanks for having me.
So, what was your reaction to what Mr. Zumlot, the head of the Palestinian diplomatic mission to the UK, had to say about what transpired over the weekend and the larger context of the ongoing conflict between Palestinians and Israelis?
I mean, not only is his response pathetic, you have to understand that it's clear from his response that he is actually relishing the attention that his movement is getting now as a result. If anything, he's not only supporting Hamas, but supporting these acts of terror, the horrific aggression that Hamas did against innocent civilians. And the bottom line is that they are relishing in this. This war of aggression is intentional to get sort of their nihilistic approach of the Islamists. And whether, there's two factions in the Palestinian movement that are radical. One is the Islamist that works with the global jihadis from Iran to the Muslim Brotherhood to the Shia militias now that are speaking with them. And the other is the Palestinianists, if you will, the national fascists of the Palestinian movement that are anti-Semitic, just like any Arabist, like Assad, Saddam Hussein were. Those are not necessarily jihadists, but they work hand in hand with them, and they will do anything and sacrifice their own people in order to promote their own form of fascism, which is Palestinianism. So their people are fodder for that. And I have to tell you, one of them, I can't tell you how much disappointment there is. I look at the U.S. Coalition Council of Muslim Organizations based out of Chicago and Washington, which is a leadership organization of Muslim groups, put out a press release 3 days ago as the war of Hamas against Israel was slaughtering Jewish citizens in Israel, saying that they have sympathy for the Palestinian movement, said nothing about the terrorists, nothing about what that's actually doing to Palestinians. So we're seeing overt support of Hamas by mosques across the country under the rubric of the Muslim Brotherhood movement of the U.S. Council of Muslim Organizations, and it's just pathetic. The moral injustice in their stance is embarrassment to our faith, embarrassment to America, and is really a vacuum that the Biden administration created by emboldening the likes of Ilhan Omar and we saw the Black Lives Matter movement yesterday come out very much supporting. They called the Hamas act an act of self-defense. And so you see this coalition globally of the red-green axis of the Marxists and the Islamists from Chicago to Pakistan working together now against Israel as we sort of stand back and Biden in his basement watching the match he lit cause a war in the Middle East.
Just a little bit of a backgrounder, because this may be confusing to some people that don't have the knowledge on the topic that you have. So, all this talk about Iran providing planning and resources for this terrorist attack committed by Hamas. But people say, well, wait a second, Dr. Jasser, Iran is Shia and Hamas is Sunni. I thought these sects were in opposition to one another.
Yeah, that's a great question. The bottom line is that within the Islamic faith, there's a global political movement in which the Islamists seek to create Islamic states where the Quran is the constitution. It's a theocracy. So when the Muslim Brotherhood took over Egypt, those were Sunnis, but they wanted to have the Quran be the constitution and the theocrats, the men in beards, create a draconian theocratic state, which is what happened for a year and a half. The Khomeinis in Iran are Shia, but they have that same flavor. Call it Pepsi versus Coke of jihadism. It's two different flavors or sects, but they ultimately want the same thing, which is a theocratic state. Turkey is run by Erdogan. His party is a theocratic movement, so it has taken over Turkey, no longer a democracy, but an Islamist movement. So that stands in difference to the Saudi Arabias of the world, the military dictatorships of Sisi in Egypt, which are secular dictatorships, but they dabble in Islamic law to sort of appease these Islamic movements. So bottom line is sometimes they can be at each other's throats, and other times they create common enemies, especially what Iran or Muslim Brotherhood called the Great Satan, which is America, and the Little Satan, which is Israel. But at the end of the day, this is why we need to stand for truth. This is why American Muslims need to lead sort of the moral clarity. And unfortunately, the vast majority of organizations speaking on behalf of our faith are Hamas, ISIS apologists rather than actually standing with moral clarity.
Well, there's, obviously the Gaza Strip is under siege and the civilians, the Palestinians, want to escape and get out. But why isn't Egypt letting them come into their country?
This is the question of why every war that happens, you find the reality. And by the way, why did this start right now? It's not just about the Palestinians and about Hamas and their jihadism. It's about the accords that were starting to normalize relations with Israel, with the Saudis, with Bahrain, with the Emirates. This is what they wanted to derail and stop and bring attention, regardless of how violent it is, to the plight of the Palestinians. So they do not want this peace accords. And at the end of the day, it's the dictatorships in Egypt and Saudi. They don't want to take care of the Palestinians. It's not about human rights to them. It's about transactional improvement. It's about maintaining their own control and power. So this is why, yes, the Abraham Accords were steps forward, but internally these countries are not about human rights, and that's why we have to be the beacon of hope and stand with our ally, the only democracy in the Middle East, which is Israel, because we have a society that not only supposedly preaches liberty abroad, but enacts it domestically.
Well, so then what impact do you think this will have on the rapprochement between Israel and the Saudis, which, as you say, Iran and Hamas are trying to derail?
Well, I think in the short term, that's going to be completely on hold and nothing's going to advance. The Saudis' initial comment was embarrassingly anemic.
Well, that's so what you've seen sort of is the Arab world rally around Hamas, or at least be apologists for them, haven't you?
They have, but gosh, I mean, this is such a low standard. If you compare its response to the response of every other war the Islamists have started, this is probably the most anemic ever. So, I do think that they're losing a lot of the street cred that they had, and that's why you're finding the radical apologetics that are happening now increasing, and they're taking the friends where they can, whether it's Marxists or whatever, because their old friends, the Arab axis, the Gulf axis, is far more quiet. They're not sending right now. The financing of Hamas is coming from Qatar, Turkey, and Iran. That's it. The Saudis have not been funding them. And so regardless of the words, Hamas knows, the Palestinian radicals know that are running that place, that they're not getting the financial support, and they can't continue this type of war long without continued fuel with arms and a lot of the the $6 billion ransom that the Biden administration paid for hostages in Iran was ultimately fueling this.
Yeah, that's where I was just going to go. Well, they have the United States indirectly financing them right now, from between weapons from the Afghanistan withdrawal that were left behind to the cash for hostages. So I suppose they don't need the Saudis at this point, at least with this administration.
Exactly, and that's why as this unfolds, the Abraham Accords, at least the countries that began to have the rapprochement and peace with normalizing relations with Israel will probably move forward. But the Biden administration wouldn't even use the words Abraham Accords because they were so obsessed pathologically with being anti-Trump that they wouldn't even use those words. And Hamas saw that as a green light, because not only were they seeing billions going to Iran that was giving them the fuel to set up the missiles and ability to breach the wall and other things that they did in the surprise attack this weekend, but they realized that same government would not fight a war with Israel, would not stand with its ally, because it created this situation. And they said, we want to get this done because the administration may change next November, and this is exactly why Israel is suffering right now. And to see the Biden administration say, we stand by our ally, we're not idiots. We know that the complete implosion of the Middle East is because of the absence, the appeasement that this administration has done in what used to be an American strength across the world by peace through strength.
He is Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, co-founder of the Muslim Reform Movement. He's a former U.S. Navy lieutenant commander and author of the book A Battle for the Soul of Islam. Dr. Jasser, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer.
Your show keeps me alive during the week. There's nobody I'd rather listen to between 5 and 9 in the morning than you guys.
On AM 560, The Answer.
Signature Bank is Chicago's fastest growing independently owned business bank, a bank where relationships still matter. I'm Dan Proft, and I know this because Signature Bank is my business bank.
Hey all, Jim Carr here. I am the owner of Carr Machine and Tool in Elk Grove Village and loyal customer of Signature Bank. As a second generation owner, I knew